My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 33 years old, and I didn't know the end of my relationship would arrive without yelling, without slammed doors, without even raised voices, until my boyfriend muted the TV, turned toward me, and said 4 words that quietly rearranged my life. We need to talk. We'd been together for 2 years, long enough that people stopped asking how we met, long enough that routines replaced effort, long enough that I mistook comfort for safety. We met at a friend's wedding, bonded over dry chicken and warm champagne, laughing in the corner like we'd known each other far longer than a single night. He was charming in an effortless way, confident, ambitious, the kind of man people naturally leaned toward. I was steady, reliable, the woman who remembered birthdays, paid bills on time, showed up early and stayed late. At the time, I thought balance was love. That Tuesday night in April, we were sitting on his couch watching one of those loud reality shows he loved. I couldn't even tell you which one. Contestants yelling, fake drama, scripted chaos, background noise to a life I thought was stable. He muted the TV. I noticed the silence before the words. "Elena," he said, folding his hands like this was a performance review, "I don't think this is working anymore." The room tilted, just slightly, like when an elevator stops between floors. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice level through sheer will. He sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested this conversation was harder for him than it would ever be for me. "You're a great person," he said. "Really, but you're predictable." "Predictable?" "You work your 9 to 5. You go to the gym the same days every week. You wear the same kinds of clothes, order the same food, plan everything in advance. You're safe." I waited. My hands were cold, but my face stayed still. "Safe isn't exciting," he continued. "I'm 34. I don't want ordinary. I want someone extraordinary." The word sat between us like something sharp. "So this is about someone else?" I asked. "No," he said too fast. "This is about me not wanting to settle." Then he laughed. Not mean, not mocking, worse than both. Casual. Like he was commenting on traffic instead of dismantling the future I thought we were building. I stood. "You're right," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I'm not your type." "Elena, don't be dramatic." "This isn't drama," I replied, reaching for my jacket. "This is clarity." I walked out while he was still explaining himself. The drive home was silent. No crying, no shaking, just an odd stillness. Like my body hadn't caught up with the moment yet. When I got to my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself, not harshly, not gently, honestly. I looked like the woman he described, neat, controlled, contained. I grabbed a notebook and wrote down everything he said I wasn't. Exciting, passionate, risk-taking, extraordinary. I didn't know it then, but that list wasn't an insult. It was a map. I didn't wake up the next morning transformed. There was no movie montage, no sudden confidence, no dramatic glow-up. What I woke up with was resolve, the quiet kind that settles into your chest and refuses to leave. I went to work like usual, answered emails, sat through meetings, smiled at jokes that weren't funny. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, something had cracked open. I folded that list and tucked it into my wallet. Not as a reminder of him, but as proof of how small I'd been living. The first change wasn't bold, it was discipline. I'd always gone to the gym, but passively. Maintenance workouts, same machines, same pace, same excuses. This time, I hired a trainer. His name was Daniel, and he didn't care if I was tired or uncomfortable or unsure. He cared that I showed up. 6 days a week. The first month hurt in ways I hadn't expected. My muscles burned. My confidence lagged behind my effort. I wanted to quit more times than I wanted to admit. I didn't. By the 3rd month, my body felt different, not just stronger, but capable, like it could carry more weight than I'd ever allowed it to. The second change was how I presented myself. I donated half my closet, not because the clothes were bad, but because they were chosen to help me disappear. Neutral colors, safe cuts, nothing memorable. I worked with a stylist for the first time in my life. She asked me a question no one ever had. "How do you want to feel when you walk into a room?" I didn't say noticed. I said, confident. The woman who stepped out of that fitting room still looked like me, but sharper, intentional, unapologetic. The third change terrified me. I quit my job. Not recklessly, not impulsively. I planned. I saved. I built a client list quietly on nights and weekends. I'd always wanted to start my own consulting practice, but stability had kept me frozen. 3 months after the breakup, I handed in my resignation. My boss blinked twice. "You're sure?" For the first time in my life, I was. The days that followed were hard, uncertain, quiet in a way that forced me to hear my own thoughts. But every invoice I sent, every client call I led, every decision I made on my own, it rebuilt something inside me. 6 months later, I ran into my ex at a cafe. He looked surprised to see me. I didn't feel anything at all. He told me I looked different. I smiled. "I am," I said. And for the first time, it wasn't something I needed him to understand. I handed in my notice. The fear was immediate, sharp, physical, settling in my stomach the moment I walked out of my boss's office, but right alongside it was exhilaration, light, electric, undeniable. For the first time, the next step belonged entirely to me. I started saying yes to things I'd always postponed. A spontaneous weekend road trip with no itinerary. A language class I'd talked myself out of for years. A climbing gym. Even though heights terrified me and my hands shook the first time I looked down, I wasn't chasing chaos. I was chasing presence, moments that required me to be fully awake inside my own life. By September, I barely recognized my routines. My days weren't smaller anymore. They were fuller, harder, braver. And that's when I met Noah. It was at a networking event I nearly skipped because I was tired and tempted to go home early. He wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate conversations or work the room. He listened. We talked for almost 2 hours about work, ambition, failure, the kind of truths people usually soften or avoid altogether. He asked thoughtful questions. He remembered details. And when he handed me his card, he didn't linger or sell himself. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said simply. "If you're interested." I was. Our first date wasn't dramatic or loud. It was easy. Conversation flowed without effort, without performance, and for the first time in a long time, easy didn't feel like settling. It felt like alignment. By October, we were officially together, and the strangest part was this: I didn't feel like I was proving anything anymore. Not my worth, not my success, not my independence. I felt like I'd finally arrived where I was meant to stand. Success doesn't come with fireworks. It slips in quietly, almost politely. Then one day, you look around and realize your life no longer resembles the one you were afraid to lose. By November, my business was stable, not just surviving, growing. I signed 3 long-term clients. I stopped chasing opportunities and started choosing them. I hired a part-time assistant and began looking at office space instead of working exclusively from my kitchen table. I was busy, but not drained, purposeful. Noah fit into that life effortlessly. He didn't compete with my ambition or shrink beside it. He asked questions. He celebrated wins I hadn't even thought to celebrate. He reminded me to eat when I forgot. One night, cooking dinner together, he looked at me and said, "You know what I like most about you?" I smiled. "I'm afraid to ask." "You're brave," he said, "but you don't perform it, you just live it." I didn't tell him how close I'd come to never discovering that part of myself. The past found me anyway. It started small. A mutual friend mentioned my ex had asked about me at a bar. Another said he'd left his job, that things hadn't turned out the way he expected. I felt nothing until the doorman called up one Thursday afternoon. "There's a man here asking for you," he said. "Says he knows you." Curiosity won. When I opened the door, he looked different, thinner, tired, like someone who'd been chasing something that kept moving further away. "Elena," he said quietly, "thank you for seeing me." "What do you want?" I asked, staying in the doorway. "To apologize," he said. Then he talked about fear, about mistakes, about confusing excitement with instability. "I miss you," he finished. "I want another chance." I felt something then, not anger, clarity. "I'm happy," I said, "and I won't shrink myself again to make someone feel bigger." He nodded slowly. I see you now. I know, I replied, but you're too late. When I closed the door, my hands weren't shaking. That's how I knew I'd moved on. December arrived quietly, deadlines, early sunsets, sharp cold air. Noah and I had been together just over 3 months, solid, but intentional. For his birthday, I made reservations at a restaurant downtown I'd wanted to try for years. White tablecloths, soft lighting, city reflections in glass. Halfway through dinner, I felt the shift before I saw him. My ex stood near the entrance with a woman on his arm, polished, stylish, laughing too loudly. His eyes met mine. Noah followed my gaze. Is that him? Yes, I said. He reached across the table and took my hand. No questions, no tension. When my ex approached, Noah stood and offered his hand, calm, unthreatened. The moment passed quickly, and that was the victory. 6 months later, Noah and I were talking about moving in together. My business was expanding. Trips I once called someday were booked. I ran into my ex one last time in March. You were never ordinary, he said. I smiled, not for him, but for myself. Some chapters don't need dramatic endings. They just need to stay closed.